Is it normal for a soft drink company to own a navy? At first, it sounds completely ridiculous. Yet, one of the world's largest beverage companies, Pepsi, actually managed to do exactly that. We're pretty sure there wasn't a clause in the company's founding document stating that one day it would become the owner of one of the world's largest naval fleets. And yet, during the final years of the Cold War, a bizarre agreement turned Pepsi into the owner of one of the largest navies on the planet, at least for a brief moment. And no, this isn't an urban legend. It really happened. So, how did a company known for selling soft drinks end up owning warships and submarines? To answer that question, we need to go back to the late 1950s. At the time, the world was divided into two opposing camps. On one side stood the United States, on the other stood the Soviet Union. The rivalry between these two superpowers extended far beyond military power. They competed in technology, the space race, economics, and ideology. But the Soviet Union had a growing problem: consumer goods. While American supermarkets were filled with hundreds of different products, Soviet citizens had far fewer choices. Western brands were virtually non existent throughout the Soviet Union. And that's where Pepsi's story begins. In 1959, the United States organized a major exhibition in Moscow, the capital of its Cold War rival. The goal was simple: showcase American technology and the American way of life to the Soviet people. Among the brands featured at the exhibition was Pepsi. During the event, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev was offered a glass of Pepsi. Standing beside him was U.S. Vice President Richard Nixon. Photographers captured the moment. Within days, the images had spread around the world. And just like that, Pepsi became one of the first major American brands to gain a foothold inside the Soviet market. Pepsi's executives immediately recognized the opportunity. They were looking at a market of hundreds of millions of potential customers. And they had almost no competition. But there was one major obstacle. The Soviet ruble was not freely traded on international markets. In other words, even if Pepsi sold its products in the Soviet Union, the company couldn't easily use the money it received elsewhere in the world. So the situation was simple. The Soviets wanted Pepsi. Pepsi wanted access to the Soviet market, but the payment system didn't work. The solution was surprisingly unconventional. Instead of paying with money, the Soviet Union would pay with vodka. The old concept of barter was making a comeback. Pepsi received the American distribution rights for Stolichnaya, one of the Soviet Union's most famous vodka brands. The arrangement worked perfectly. Soviet citizens got Pepsi. Pepsi got access to a massive market and earned money by selling Soviet vodka in the United States. For years, the agreement continued without major issues. But by the late 1980s, a new problem emerged. Pepsi had become extremely popular across the Soviet Union. Sales kept growing year after year. Pepsi had no problem selling more products. The Soviet Union, however, was no longer interested in increasing vodka exports enough to cover the growing value of the deal. Once again, both sides faced a payment problem. And this time, the Soviet Union proposed something even more unusual: retired military vessels. The offer included frigates, destroyers, and even submarines. Pepsi accepted the deal. Of course, the company wasn't planning to use its fleet to attack ships carrying Coca-Cola products. The plan was much simpler: acquire the vessels and sell them for scrap. But for a brief period, Pepsi had become something far more than a beverage company. It was now the owner of dozens of military ships. Newspapers around the world couldn't believe the story. Could a soft drink company really own a navy? According to some reports, Pepsi briefly possessed the sixth largest navy in the world. The exact ranking is still debated today. But the ranking itself isn't the important part, because one fact remains unchanged. A soft drink company owned warships. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. The Cold War came to an end, and with it, these extraordinary barter agreements disappeared into history. Today, when we see a bottle of Pepsi on a supermarket shelf, we think of nothing more than a soft drink. But when you realize that the same company once owned warships and submarines, you begin to understand that history can sometimes be stranger than fiction.